Why I am here today is because Franz Schimmel wanted me to be here today, so he put my name forward, and this process has been one of discernment since that moment for me and my family. I have a wife of 6 years almost, and a daughter of 9 months, and so we've been talking about what it might mean for us. It's been a difficult process for us as we've been thinking about where is God leading us, and for me it's a lot about where is God leading our church. I think it's a pivotal moment for our church. We have a lot of great opportunity before us, but we also have a lot of great challenges as well, and we have to meet those challenges as a church, and we have to do it together. And so I guess the gifts that I bring are ones that, the gifts that I bring are building relationships. I have a strong passion for proclaiming the gospel and building connections between people. And what that has meant in the story of Abiding Grace. Abiding Grace is a new mission started in the summer of 2010. And we've gone from zero, from nothing, to we're bringing 24 members tomorrow. That's going to bump us over 350 members. From the start of 2016, we've been worshiping over 170 per Sunday, and God is just multiplying everything that we've trying to do. And over the process, I've learned a lot. I've learned what to do. I've learned what not to do. I've made a lot of mistakes, but I've seen God working in the midst of people who are faithful and people who really want to make a difference in their community. And so as I look at our mission area and the congregations in our mission area and the challenges in our mission area, I see a lot of churches challenged with declining numbers and wanting to figure out what they can do to be better prepared for the coming years and decades. And I think that's one of the gifts that I bring is my background prior to seminary. I was with Chrysler Corporation. I was a district sales manager, and I traveled to dealerships throughout Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire, helping them grow their business. And one of the gifts that I bring is helping congregations, helping companies grow. And I don't necessarily know that I need to be bishop to do that. I'm certainly available for anybody who wants to talk about what's going on in their congregation, but I think that's why I'm here today, so thank you.
I'm Russell Vardell, the pastor of First United Lutheran Church in Dallas, Texas. My people have been in the United States since the 1600s. We drifted our way across from the East Coast until we found the best place to live, North Texas, and a little bit of corner of Oklahoma. We were mostly farmers, and so I learned at a very young age how to hoe rows for cotton and to cut calves. I'm not doing that again. And a few other things, although I was a city boy, and from the 3rd grade on went to a pretty much multicultural school, growing up in the Dallas School District and some of the suburbs. One of the things I didn't know about, though, was the Lutheran Church until I was in college, or actually just finishing high school. Grew up in a kind of the Southern Protestant way, and it was all about being good enough for God to care about you and for you to somehow be blessed in your life. And I discovered in the small catechism the God that loved me for myself and cared about me, forgave me, and then equipped me to care about other people. And that's what then sent me from college on to seminary, where I went to seminary in Minnesota, where I discovered most Lutherans live where it's really cold. So in addition to trying to convert Texans to Lutheranism, I'm trying to convert Lutherans to Texanism, if that's possible. I've been blessed to serve many congregations, either as called pastor or as an interim situation. Started down in South Texas with small rural churches where many people came to church because it was the thing to do in the community. Served campus ministry, served in the Dallas Metroplex, came back in about 1990 and helped a mission congregation get into its first building, and then taught a little bit of college and then served other churches while I did that, even driving to Durant, Oklahoma for many years. And it's been my pleasure then to be in Dallas, back to where I was born, for the last 7 years. In that little journey of life, I've discovered a broad spectrum of Lutherans, but a good people committed to community, committed to service, and I think that's the kind of person I would hope to be as a leader in that kind of situation. Married, have 2 children who, thank you, live outside of home. My time is my own, and I want to continue to serve God in the way that I can do that best, except no cutting calves. I'm done with that. So I'm pleased to be up here and happy to be with this group, and I'll pass on the mic.
Good afternoon. I am Jane Marr, and I'm your bishop assistant and have been in that role for the last 7 years. I want to start by thanking all of you for being here today, knowing that we were live streaming. I just had this sense that this group of us up here were maybe going to be speaking to an empty room, and we'd have to try to pretend there were bodies out there. So I'm delighted, and it also shows how seriously you are taking the process. So thank you for that and for your commitment to taking time away on a Saturday to be with us. Prior to being bishop assistant, I have served 2 congregations. I served first in Northwest Arkansas for 3 years in my first call in Peace Lutheran in Rogers, Arkansas. Then moved as my husband retired, and so that kind of opened up our opportunity to move. So I took a call then to Emmanuel Lutheran in Granbury and was there for 5 years before Bishop invited me to serve on the staff. I am a Janie come lately to ministry. I grew up in the Catholic Church and was very active in that during my years as a child and a young adult. I didn't realize when I went to college that Roanoke was a Lutheran college. I just liked the campus and the programming. And so that was my first touch, although I didn't really engage beyond kind of worship life on campus. And so it was as I moved to Houston with my job, I was working for IBM, where Dan and I met each other, and we joined the Lutheran Church together. We were dating and began attending worship, and so I was very touched as a former Catholic by what is unique for us, I think, is God's grace. And so to hear that and to experience that in that first community where we were members was very powerful for me. As I said, Dan is retired, and so he now has the capacity to travel with me, and when I'm on the road on Sundays, sometimes he does come with me, depending on how far I'm going and what my business may be. He and I have 2 children, both of which have gotten married in the last couple of years, and so I'm on the countdown clock for grandbabies, but they're not quite on my horizon, but I have a glimmer out there, so that's an exciting thing that we're both looking forward to. In addition to being passionate about the work that I do here, Dan and I really love to travel, and so I find that that's a really good way for me to experience renewal, is to go visit somewhere different. I think it comes because I grew up as an oil brat, and that meant that my family moved about every 2 years because of my father's career. So we were around in the United States as well as the Middle East. And so that's led me to have an interest in meeting people from all kinds of cultures and having a relationship with them and exploring what that looks like. And I see that very much lived out within the area that is the Northern Texas, Northern Louisiana mission area. We are blessed by the diversity that we have here, and I look to see ways in which we can increase that diversity within our congregation. Thank you for this afternoon.
Hi, I'm Phil Gillespie, and I am the executive director here at Briarwood. And you may not recognize me because I think this is the very first time I've ever worn a collar here at Briarwood. I had to introduce myself to Aaron Colwick because he wasn't sure who I was. He thought I looked familiar, but I wasn't quite sure. But I am the executive director here, and I am also a pastor, and am honored actually to be participating now in this conversation of potential nominees. I began ministry growing up in the Midwest, in northern Indiana. Michigan City, Indiana is my hometown. Went to Valparaiso University, and then on to Trinity Lutheran Seminary. While at seminary, I went on internship, and I did what interns are no longer allowed to do. I dated a young woman from the parish. And in those days, that's actually what you were supposed to do. You were supposed to go out on internship single, and come back married. And I pretty much accomplished that, although we married after I graduated. But I married Anna she was a student actually at UTA and a member at Shepherd of Life in Arlington. Our first call was in the Illinois Peoria area. And we, after the first winter there, Anna looked at me and said, "Get me back to Texas." So we came down to Texas 3 years later, and I served down in Pretty, Texas, in a rural parish, and actually had the time of my life. Got introduced to real Texas living, and it was a two-point parish. It was Zion in Pretty and Hope in Comanche, and then came up to Flower Mound, and almost felt like I was moving back up north, because in the Metroplex area, there are so many people from the north who have moved down. But served there a number of years, and then had an inkling that maybe I was being called in a new direction. So I resigned my call at Faith and joined my wife in a business venture. We opened a cosmetology school, and I was a beauty school director for 2.5 years. Now, I don't want anybody to be concerned. I did not teach anybody how to cut hair or anything like that. All I did was manage the books. But nevertheless, it was a wonderful experience, and during that experience, I realized that I really missed the ministry of the church, and I had to get back in. So I came back, and I went to Rejoice. Was there a number of years, working with a group of people from our synod in the development of our vision, and we started talking about using Briarwood for leadership development, and was really moved by that call and that opportunity, so I decided to take a call and come here and be a part of this process. Now, I will tell you, I am somewhat of a Johnny-come-lately, so for that, I apologize to everybody for not joining you in this conversation earlier. But I have since realized that I was keeping out of this conversation for the wrong reasons, and decided it was important to let my name go forward, because one would never know if you're being called if you don't allow it to happen. So I put my name out there. I look forward to visiting with you and building on the vision that we've developed here in this ministry. So it's good to be with you. Thank you for coming, and have a great one.
Thank you, Phil. You never taught anyone reason why. He did mine. Paul Krapika. I'm a pastor at St. Matthew Lutheran in Waco. Born and raised in Waco, I'm the living proof of challenging the Lord on a prophet and something about his hometown. After 28 years of being out of Waco, swearing I'd never come back to Waco, I'm back in Waco now 13 years, which is intriguing to say the least. Born and raised a Lutheran, thanks to Pastor Ed High. Got my family in because there were no Moravian Brethren churches. Blood heritage is Bohemian Moravian Brethren. And there weren't any churches of that denomination in Waco. Ed talked to my parents, and we were on and off again attendees at Christ Lutheran in Waco. My call in ministry or in the faith was to make sure in my first year of confirmation, I made my pastor who was teaching that, Andy Anderson, make his life pure hell. And I accomplished it royally. At some point between the first and second year, the Holy Spirit got a hold of me, and at my ordination, he looked at me and said, "Of all the people I ever would think would be a pastor, Paul, you are the very last one." My wife, Joanne, joined our church in the 9th grade, and we dated from the 9th grade on and got married. We've been married 40 years. We have 2 children, Stephen, who is the site director of Ebert Ranch in South Texas, who has also 4 boys that are a handful, and our daughter, Karen, who is right now in College Station. She and her husband are studying to be missionaries to Kosovo, and will be going to Kosovo either in late July or early August for several years. I attended Baylor University in the 70s during the moderate conservative split. If you were familiar with that here in Texas, it was a great battle. I actually attended Baylor to convert all the Baptists to being Lutherans, failed miserably, so I went to seminary at Wartburg in Dubuque, Iowa. What do you do when you fail to convert the Baptists? You go to Iowa. Makes total sense. Which was predominantly Lutheran and Catholic, have studied one Baptist theology from Baylor, Lutheran theology, and at Wartburg is a consortium. There was Thomas Aquinas there and took classes there and understand Roman Catholicism as well. So when it came time for assignments, the bishop down here said, "You're coming back and teaching us as Lutherans how to deal with the Baptists and the Catholics." And so I ended up back in Waco. I've served 4 churches. Eagle Lake was my first one, a rapidly dying church, and they were bound and determined to do that. Stonewall at Trinity Lutheran is on the LBJ Ranch and Park System. Georgetown, one of the fastest growing congregations in Southwest Texas for a number of years, and now St. Matthew Lutheran in Waco for 13 years. And I saw the red card coming, so we'll pass it on.
You good back there, Jesus? You guys can't see the fun that we're having back there. They're having a little bit of technical difficulties. Hi, I'm Eric Gronberg. I'm the lead pastor at Trinity Lutheran Church in Fort Worth, Texas, just down the road from here. I'm also the dean of the Metroplex West Conference, so it's my job to say welcome. Bienvenidos. Thank you. Gracias for coming out today. This is our event, and we are pleased to host it along with the Latino Conference. And Dean Irma and Jesus, thank you. They've got him in a tiny box now. You guys can't see this, it's funny. Welcome to all those who are watching us on live stream too. Thank you for coming out, but it is good that we have a studio audience for this. I serve at Trinity with my wife, Pastor Kendra Moan, who is on staff there as our teaching pastor, is also pursuing her PhD in New Testament at Bright Divinity School at TCU, which is what brought us to Texas from Wisconsin, where we were serving our first calls. About a year ago, people started asking me if I was willing to stand for this election. And Kendra and I spent a long time in prayer and conversation about whether or not this was something that was right for us at this time in our life. And we decided that we would go into the process. And we went into the process, my name was put forward. We went into the process, we've been to all the events, have been around the missionary, traveled. And through that process, I have been excited. I've been excited, and I've come to the conclusion that yes, should the assembly deem that I am the right person to be called as the bishop, I am open, and I do feel called to that. And I feel called to that for several reasons. The first is what's going on right here. For the last year and a half, I've been privileged to serve as the board chair for Briarwood's board. And the excitement about getting this facility completed, the opportunities we have to really take the next step and to see the potential here. And having had that role, I think whoever is elected bishop needs to be aware of that and needs to be committed to that. The second is that I believe in the wider church. I was born down in Austin, Texas, was raised there. I like to say that I was in ministry from the day I was born. I'm a preacher's kid. It's part of the deal. But I've journeyed around the country, did my college on the East Coast, interned out on the West Coast, did seminary at Luther in St. Paul. And so I have connections to the wider church. And in this process, I've engaged friends from around the church, bishops, church-wide staff, DEMs, and talked to them and said, do you think I am called to this? Is this right? Do my gifts fit? And what I've heard is they encouraging me because we have a pivotal time. The ELCA has a lot of decisions. Our NTNL have a lot of decisions that we are going to have to make over the next 6 years. Decisions that are going to impact the church for decades to come. And we need to have folks who are committed to the church for that. But all of that exists really for one main reason. Briarwood, the church-wide, exists for the local congregation. And the local congregation is my passion. That's where I've served. That's what I believe in. The local congregations where conversations about race and justice, about sexuality, where ministry happens. And as a bishop, you must be committed to the local congregations. And that is one of my core convictions, is that that is the front line, the riskiest place of ministry, and where the best ministry is happening right now. So thank you, gracias, and I look forward to the conversation.
Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Borgort. I serve as pastor of First Lutheran Church in Longview, Texas, and I have been in that role since November of 2009. Prior to that, I served for 9 years as a pastor in Ely, Iowa, which is in suburban Cedar Rapids, if there is such a thing in Iowa in that area. Like I said, I was there for 9 years, and it was a small town that had grown into a bedroom community and suburb, and it was a very interesting place to serve. I'm married. I was married to my wife, Diane, in 1994. She serves as a proposal writer for an educational software company here in the DFW area and works from our home in Longview. And she has a lot of passion for computers and technical stuff, and she's been a great support in my ministry in that area as well. A couple of things that to let you know kind of what my passions are, or what I'm really interested in, I think, as I look at the ministry that we share together in NTNL. And I want to talk a little bit about a clergy group that I'm a part of in Longview to give it a sense of what that's about. Just this past week, we had a meeting of our group, and we were sitting at a local restaurant around some tables. There were probably 15 to 20 of us there. Several folks that were maybe new to the group, or they hadn't been there real regularly, and we were just kind of talking, and the topic of dues and money came up. And so the person who's in charge of that made his big spiel about money and so forth, and then he said, and if you want to know what our group is about, I've got this other stuff. You can read our Constitution, and you can read our mission statement and visions and all of that stuff, right? And then he finally got done talking, and as the chair of this group, I said, now if you want to know what all that paper that Ray wants to give you is about, I said, I want you to look around the table. And what I want to tell you today is around that table we had female pastors. Around that table we had African American pastors. Around that table we had Latino and Hispanic pastors. Around that table we also had Caucasians and mainlines. You know, in East Texas, most of the folks are Baptist, let's just be honest, right? So the fact that we could bring people together across race, across gender, across denomination, across theology, and we all sat literally around the same table, that's a big deal to me. And I think that that's also true for us in NTNL as well, because we have those same groups, race, ethnicity, divergent theology. All of that is a part of the community and the area in which we do ministry. And so for me, one of my passions, if I'm called to the office of bishop, is how do we bring people together and share together in the unity that we have as God's people in Jesus Christ. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Pastor Kathy Johnson. I serve at Our Redeemer Lutheran Church in Grand Prairie on the south side of the Metroplex. I've been there since February of 2012. Y'all have heard this saying, I'm sure. I wasn't born in Texas, but I got here as fast as I could. That is true for me, but the other thing is I wasn't born in the ELCA, but I got here as fast as I could. I came to the ELCA via the Missouri Synod. All right. I was raised in the Episcopal Church, the daughter of one of the first female priests ordained in the Diocese of Texas in the Episcopal Church. So I too is a PK a little bit later in life than Eric. But I am unique in that I am in the first generation of women pastors who are the daughters of women pastors. And that's kind of a strange place to be sometimes, but I claim it with some pride and a lot of joy. I love being in the ELCA. I think that we offer the world an incredible message of grace and love that I think the world really desperately needs to hear. I think that we are surrounded by a theology that preaches that we're not good enough, that we can never do enough, that we can never be enough. And yet we preach this theology of grace. We preach this theology, I'm going to be preaching it tomorrow morning, of abundant grace, 153 fish in that net. That's not about fish, that's about grace. And that's our message. That's the message that God has given to us as Lutherans to proclaim in the world. And I love proclaiming that message. I've been in discernment kind of like Eric, a year, maybe a little bit longer. I've had people approach me and say, please be in discernment about this. And it was like, huh? Me? Really? Are you kidding? But the longer I've struggled with it, the more I've thought about it, the more I've prayed about it, the more angels I've wrestled with, the more I've come down on the fact that, yes, I do feel called to the ministry of bishop someday. Whether that's now or later, who knows? But I think all we can do in this process is do our very best to be open, do our very best to listen to what the Holy Spirit is whispering in our ears, and then follow along accordingly. I want to join others in thanking you and being here today. It is important. It is so vital. And I really, really am glad that y'all gave up part of your Saturday to be here with us today. Thank you.
Which angel did you wrestle with?
Gabriel.
Gabriel, the dog, right. And she won. Excellent. Hi, my name is Mark Hander, and I'm associate pastor at Advent Lutheran in Arlington, and I've been there for almost 8 years, and prior to that was in Greenville at Redeemer for 7+ years. So I'm in my second call, but for sure our calls begin way early in life, even before we know it. Grew up in the little farming community of Thrall, Texas, in central Texas outside of Austin, where the community was relatively diverse, but it was diverse by the railroad tracks who lived on the other side of the tracks. And when I began to grow and understand that folks on the other side of the tracks from where my skin color lived, that there were deep-rooted issues of hatred from my side of the tracks, folks that were very incredibly gifted and spiritual in ways that I didn't even know. So I grew with that understanding is that something was wrong. Something was wrong, and I grew up in a church that looked at things that were wrong and said, well, there's something God can do about that. And I think that's really what shaped me as I grew in our farming community around where the land and the animals were more priceless than what car we drove necessarily or what kind of house we lived in. So as I grew in that understanding, went to Texas Lutheran, campus ministry took a hold of me, or I took a hold of it, or God took a hold of me, which, however, this all dances together for sure. Campus ministry was a place where I began to see where God's grace was very active and alive, and God could use someone like me in sharing God's mission and sharing the message in the Bible studies and sharing in service with the community through Texas Lutheran. It was at that time when I had aspirations of being a pharmacist and being a chemist and making money that, yeah, the laughter happens. Why do people laugh at that all the time? I had no idea what direction I was to go in life. And the campus pastor at that time, now John Beatty, who recently deceased, he was saying, Mark, have you ever considered, and I said, don't say the next word, being a pastor. And I said, yeah, but that's what people who are poor do. And so for that long journey of campus ministry, of growing up in a community that cared for each other very deeply, have been known community in the congregation and the church to be one that extends incredible grace, incredible love in helping me to grow and how I've embodied that over time. So the call to being open to this conversation around bishop election when I was, well, it's time's up, so you don't get to hear that. Nanner, nanner, nanner.
Okay, thank you. First, I would like to thank you all for speaking into the microphone so that we could hear all of you. Thank you for that. Thank you for honoring our time system. The good news is we only have 2 minutes now for each of these questions, so do with that. The first question, and these were prepared questions that came in from both conferences, Latino and Metroplex West, and Pastor Jesus and myself, again, we just randomly picked questions. So these first two are prepared questions that they've had time to actually think a little bit about. This first one had several parts, and it's been narrowed down so that you only have 2 minutes. We're going to start with Chuck Hubbard's responses just to get you warmed up. So the question is, what is your vision towards preparing leaders for ordination that is different than the traditional track, including hospital chaplaincy, campus ministry, etc.? Okay. Hubbard's response. Pastor Chuck Hubbard, excuse me. We need to be creative here, although I think there are workable models to be found. Work study or cooperative learning programs are being used in various industries, and I can envision a student with a modest degree of training being certified to serve as a resident doing word and sacrament ministry while engaged in extensive formal training. A variety of tools might be small study groups, online instruction, face-to-face supervision, periodic intensives at seminary or at Briarwood. Features of the traditional track. There are no substitutes for being well-schooled in Lutheran theology and tradition, the history of the church, the nature and origins of Holy Scripture, as well as in the principles of leadership and pastoral care. Studies in Greek and Hebrew, while enriching, may be a luxury for some future pastors. A pastor would be ordained when the combination of work-study apprenticeship is completed. We can come up with a new model similar to the work-study cooperative learning programs found in different industries. I would support calls to hospital or ministry and campus ministry, as long as the preaching and teaching of the gospel and the sacramental practices are central in the ministry context. Pastoral ministry is always in a state of flux. The post-Christian era, as it is sometimes called, simply presents us with new and stimulating challenges. The Spirit is with us. Thank you, Pastor Chuck Hubbard. All right. Okay, let's go backwards. Yeah. You're welcome.
Hi, my name is Mark Hander. I'm just kidding. With my experience in seminary education was the traditional route. So that's kind of what we know, and what we know is most familiar, but I also know for many of my classmates it was not fulfilling. We had pastors or students at their last semester of seminary who were being told I'm sorry, you're not going to be approved to be a pastor, and the waste of resources, the waste of energy for the person, how the church identifies pastors, how we are called as pastors to identify future leaders. It's really about a leadership and a discernment about who is being lifted up, as well as measuring that against what the church's needs are. I think we are very aware there's many pastors who and potential pastors who are there who have a call that want to be a pastor, but the church is also very aware of not filling calls in many places around the country. There's many pastors without calls, the shorthand way to say that. And so how does the church begin to identify what the need is across the United States and where the ministry opportunities lie? And identify the leaders maybe from another approach, not the approach of, I feel called, you need to find me a call, but looking at the church and the church's needs and identifying people with the gifts to serve in those ways.
Thank you.
I sort of did traditional seminary. I tried. My seminary career actually covered a span of 7 years, and I was a student for all of those 7 years except for one. My mom got sick and died during my time in seminary, and my husband and I got married during my first year of seminary, which, by the way, is not something I recommend. And what my point is that I had a candidacy committee that journeyed with me through all of these massive life changes so that I could take a little bit longer to get through seminary. Some of that time I was part-time, some of that time I was full-time. During that time I was on internship, was when the Lutheran Seminary program in the Southwest decided to suspend the MDiv program, so we had to kind of, figure some things out there. My point is, here I am. In spite of all of that, I'm here. The church called me and ordained me. And so I guess I'm sort of like proof that somehow it all works, even if we don't think that it makes sense according to some traditional track. We have to figure out new ways of doing this, because not everybody anymore can just give up 3 or 4 years of their lives and move to wherever and have their spouse give up their maybe a really good and fulfilling job in order to go with them. Sometimes they have kids in school. There are all kinds of different circumstances. I love the way the teen program in particular lifts up people in their own communities to serve those communities. I think we need to do more of that. I think we need to be sure, though, that the ministry is maintaining integrity, because that's something that we have within the ELCA, is we hold each other accountable. I don't proclaim myself a pastor. The church calls me to be a pastor. And no matter how somebody is prepared for that work, we as the church still need to continue to hold people accountable to the ministry to which they are called.
I think similar to what both Mark and Kathy have said, for me this is really based on the giftedness of individuals. I went to seminary in Chicago at LSTC, and it helped me to recognize that we had students there, many of whom were commuters from various places in the suburbs, and they were part-time students, they were full-time students, sometimes they could do internship their last year, sometimes they did it traditionally the third year, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it opened up my eyes to say, you know, there's a lot of different ways to get to where you're going. And I think that for me, that allows me to look at other options that are out there, things like the team program, things like our parish lay academy that trains lay people to serve in various ways around our mission area, and to say these are ways in which God's people are using their gifts to serve the needs of the wider church. I do want to comment a little bit on kind of the specialized ministries and calls to those areas like hospital chaplaincy, military chaplaincy, and campus ministry. My understanding is that currently our policy in the ELCA is that in order to serve as a called position or a called pastor in one of those positions, one needs to have 3 years of parish congregational leadership, parish pastor experience. And I'll just go to campus ministry in the first as an example here. You know, that's young adult ministry, and for years in the ELCA, we've been saying, you know, we need more young adults, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It seems to me that campus ministry is a place where we can connect with those young adults. But if we require our pastors to have 3 years of pastoral experience prior to such a call, how old are you if you're a pipeline person all the way through, you know, college study, seminary, so forth? You're going to be at least 26 when you get done, probably. And then you have 3 more years of parish experience, you're almost 30. You're having trouble connecting with the young adults at that point. So I just want to leave you with that thought in terms of how we prepare people for those ministries. Thank you.
Well, in the Metroplex West, we ordained somebody to chaplaincy in the last 6 months, so I am fully in favor of that, absolutely. I think it's a wonderful thing. To let people serve where they are, and I think that's the key. The ELCA Division for Research released a report this last week that shows that we are going to have 1,000 clergy gap between congregations capable of calling pastors and available pastors within the next 5 years. We've been saying it's going to come. It is going to happen. So we have to fill that gap. How do we do that? Well, there are clergy who are looking for calls, but the reality is many of these places, they need people to be called from within. They need to be lifted up. This could be a large congregation looking to Second Sight. Lift somebody up from within, encourage them. A rural congregation, a Latino congregation looking for their next leader, and then they have to be educated, held accountable, and structures be in place to mentor them and to fulfill them. The team is a great model to build upon. We don't have enough team candidates. We need to build upon that. Theological education is wonderful. It's one of the gifts of our church. The reality is the seminaries are changing rapidly. This is what I mean when I say big decisions are going to be made about our seminaries, about theological education in the next 6 years. We need to be, and this comes back to my heart and my passion, local congregations finding people among them and saying, you have the gifts for ministry. You should be a pastor. And then the synod partnering with them to make that possible, making funding possible. We need to find ways to fund these things. We have an endowment fund. Congregations can help support, but we have to find ways to make it affordable, to make it work for these people. But it comes back to local congregations lifting up people from within. Trinity currently has 2 people in the ordination track. In my ministry so far, Kendra and I, we've been able to see 4 people from our congregations ordained. And there is no greater joy to see a person from your community choose to serve the church as an ordained pastor. And we need to find more effective ways to do that.
It sounds like the same verse just repeated over and over again. You know, we have team, we have PLA, we have the traditional track. We also have computer capability. Welcome to technology. So there are ways to do that. We just have to keep enhancing that and make it possible because, as Eric said, cost of seminary is astronomical. I went through seminary when the ALC paid for about 90% of the tuition. And I had a great aunt who loved me dearly when she died, left money in her will for me to go to school. and pay for my education. That's not always possible. And so it makes it very difficult for people to go who are called into ministry. So we have to find ways to be creative. We have to look for ways to keep expanding those ministries or those areas where we do that education. I do believe in the traditional track. That's what I went through. As a matter of fact, one of the young men I was a mentor to went through the Austin program, grew up in South Texas and went all the way through Austin. And I kept telling him, you need to go one semester to a seminary outside of Texas. Only for the fact that in Texas, we have a different way of looking at Lutheranism than the rest of the Lutheran Church up north does. And it's really interesting to go up and be in the majority rather than the minority and surrounded by Baptists. And unfortunately, he didn't take me up on it, and every day I listen to him and read his blogs and stuff, and I'm going, you're becoming more Baptist than Lutheran every day. So we have to look at this creatively. As for the 3-year rule, I agree with you, Jeff. Personally, I'd like to see it gone. Disciples in the first early church didn't go to the church for 3 years and then say, oh, well, let's go witness here and there. They went and witnessed wherever. And if that is the pub church, or the pub church, so be it. If that's an apartment complex, why not? Where does it say we have to do 3 years, pay your dues, and then preach the gospel? Preach the gospel anywhere and everywhere.
I'm finding this 2 minutes goes really, really fast. So let me just say ditto. I mean, I really agree with everything that's been said. The thought that came to my mind as I heard that was when Jesus asked Peter, do you love me? And Peter responds, yes, Lord, you know I do. And he said, feed my sheep. That's what it's about. Feeding the sheep, getting and proclaiming the word, making the gospel known, helping people experience the gospel, and using any means available to do that. And I believe we need to be creative. I believe we need to start lowering walls that get in the way of people coming through and becoming leaders for ministry. We see it all the time here at Briarwood. Kids that come here and have experiences, and it changes lives of other kids. We've got to keep that kind of thing going. We've got to build off the programs we've got in place. We've got TEAM. We've got the Parish Lay Mission Academy. We've got gifts that we can develop to strengthen, equipping, and training people so that they can lead. But we've got to do it. We've known this tsunami that you talk about has been coming for a long time. We've not done it. We talk about it. It's time to take the things we've talked about and put them into action. That's what it's about. Taking some risks, trusting in the grace and the goodness of the gospel to save us and move forward boldly with bold initiatives. I think about the Latino Hispanic community and the challenges of ministering authentically in that community. We've got to lower the barriers that get in the way to a good, authentic ministry. That's what we need to be about. So that would be what I would propose. If called as bishop, I would talk about how do we lower these walls? How do we equip people? How do we get people out there so that we can take advantage of the opportunity that's before us to make the gospel of Christ known throughout the world?
Thank you. I was hoping for this question. I work with leadership formation and I work with our candidacy committee. I want you to know that in the last assignment, and that's seminary graduates, which happens twice a year, and so happened in February, there were only 111 candidates for over 300 positions. We were able to meet 37% of the demand. So that vacancy rate that's on the horizon is actually already here. I am here standing before you as one who was encouraged by members of my congregation to consider serving within the church. It wasn't something that I saw within myself, although I had that interest. As a little Catholic girl, I just didn't think that was possible for me. But others around me encouraged me. And each year at our assembly, as we award our scholarships to our Fund for Leaders scholarship recipients, I stand up there and invite congregations to lift up and to celebrate the gifts of members in their communities and to encourage them to step forward. So I'm very grateful that we have some first steps here. we have a parish lay academy which equips our lay leaders to either support pastors or in many cases serve as a pastoral leader in some of our congregations. And moving beyond through our candidacy process, we do have, in addition to a typical Master of Divinity, we have the TEAM program. And for those of you who don't know what TEAM is, it's Theological Education for Emerging Ministries. And we find candidates come to us in a variety of ways. Sometimes it's an ethnic-specific community or a unique urban or rural or a community that can't afford a full-time pastor. And I am so grateful for the leaders that are lifted up in those communities who then participate in the TEAM process and earn a certificate so that they can serve. I want to see us continue to grow and expand those programs. And just a minor correction, while our typical path within the ELCA is 3 years in traditional parish ministry, we do allow ordination to specialized ministry.
Thank you. Yes. Okay. As the Dean of the Parish Lay Mission Academy, I'm very interested in educating leaders for the future. As a historian, I know that in the Lutheran Church there has been a shortage of clergy from its beginning. Some of us knew there a time when there wasn't, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, when there were plenty of pastors. In fact, when I came out, there were more pastors than there were openings, but those days are gone, and we live in a time that's different, and we may have to look at different models. In the early days of Lutheranism, there was more a kind of learning on the job, much like team ministry with a pastor as an overseer, and you would read and study and then be ordained after that. When the seminaries came in, they were originally close to where the Lutherans were. Well, that's not as true, and we've struggled in the Texas area to have a seminary that was serviceable for our population. The Austin program was good, but never quite given its freedom, and I think that's a mistake that needs to be addressed at some point. I would be very interested in all kinds of possibilities. The team as a model for the future, perhaps. Parish Lay Mission Academy, where I'm the dean, as a tool in that. One of the nice things that we've been able in the Parish Lay Mission Academy to do was to raise up our own leaders who would then train future leaders. So originally we had seminary professors who taught the Spanish language classes, but eventually we had enough trained Spanish language folk who could teach those classes. That's a model for the future, raising up our own leaders that can help train future leaders. And my last little thing is we still, though, need to have good monitoring so that we do not get pastors in parishes who will hurt those folks. Because we're about service and about Christ, not about ourselves and not about the pastoral leader.
I'm here today, and I have to express my gratitude for Bishop Knaus and for Jane. When I graduated from seminary, they allowed me to come back to Texas. My wife was here. They allowed my restriction. But they also allowed me to do something that First Call people aren't usually supposed to do, and be a mission developer. I thank you for that, because without your trust, I wouldn't be here today. Without your trust, I wouldn't be able to do what I've done at Abiding Grace, or let God do that through me. I say that because there are a number of gifted people coming out of seminaries who bishops don't really know very well and who want to do specialized ministries. And we allow it, but we need somebody to sign off on it. And it doesn't always happen. And I know many of my colleagues or classmates who wanted to do chaplaincy and who wanted to do different things and were told that they needed to do a 3-year call first, and I know how frustrating it was for them. I also want to share my gratitude. I went through seminary. I wasn't really excited about taking 4 years out of my life to go. I'm glad I did. I survived Greek and Hebrew, and I just want to share my gratitude for those who have translated the Bible from Greek and Hebrew, because I don't remember Greek or Hebrew. And I say that to say that there are different models of pastoral education, and there's a lot of things that we need to look at. We need to look at the entire system and ask, what can we do better, and how can we make this an easier transition? Because there are a lot of wonderful, gifted people who can't take 4 years out of their lives. What Trinity Lutheran Seminary is doing starting next year, 2 years of education, 2 years of internship, where they're actually putting people in context to learn what it means to be the pastor. I think that's a great model going forward. I think we can learn a lot from it. While they're still in the, while they're working in churches, they're going to be still taking classes, distance learning. What can we learn from that? A lot's going to have to change, and thank you for telling me I need to stop talking.
Thanks. Okay, again, thank you. Thank you for speaking into the mic. You've done really well so far. Question 2. After this question, we'll have a 10-minute break. The restrooms are directly, for those of you who are here, are directly down this hallway, both the men's and the women's. So we'll finish this 2 minutes again for this question, and we'll start in this end. But first, we'll start with Chuck Hubbard, Pastor Chuck Hubbard. So the question is, what is your vision of a Hispanic Latino Lutheran expression of ministry, and how should it be presented to the Hispanic Latino community? Got it? All right. From Pastor Chuck Hubbard, the first order of business for me in regard to Hispanic Latino Lutheran ministry is to listen. I want to know what folks associated with Latino community think about the most effective ways to reach the Latino community and to raise up potential ordained leadership from it. I would pay close attention to situations that have shown promise. First Lutheran in Garland is a church that transitioned from being a small, predominantly Anglo congregation into a fairly large, predominantly Hispanic Latino congregation. It's a success story. The transition began with a willingness on the part of the Anglo group to reach out to the immediate community that had become dominated by the Hispanic Latino residents. Once a week, people in the community had access to the food pantry and an extensive clothes closet. They could even sit down for a community meal. Later came experiments with Sunday morning worship service in Spanish. Eventually, Pastor Pedro Portillo developed a Hispanic Latino worshiping community by building on the relationships and goodwill already cultivated in the broader community. There's more to the story, but it shows how a productive transition can take place. Holy Trinity Irving has opened its doors, and particularly its heart, to Iglesia Lutheran Santa Maria in exile. Who knows where they may lead, perhaps to a cooperative or blended ministry. Genuine hospitality is essential if there's going to be anything like transitional ministry or blended ministry. Genuine hospitality requires a willingness to examine implicit and explicit ethnic and racial biases. It means taking courageous steps to manage biases. If medical schools can help their students learn to identify and manage their ethnic racial biases, we should be able to face it as well. Thank you, Pastor. Since these are the last of the prepared questions, that's the last time we'll hear from Pastor Chuck Hubbard. So thank him. Well, I appreciate that he wrote answers to all of these questions. We had multiple questions, so that was a lot of work on his part. So thank you, Pastor Chuck Hubbard. Okay, let's start at this end. 2 minutes, and you're on.
One of the great privileges I've had of being a pastor is getting to know my colleagues. And getting to know Pastor Jesus Escamilla, who's actually doing the translating. So I'm sorry, but I wish I could actually look at you and not see you in just that little box back there, and just say how grateful I have been for our 5-year partnership in ministry that we've had at Abiding Grace with San Gabriel and Alvarado. We've gone down there 2 or 3 times a year, every year, to be with the people there, to share our resources with them, and to just get to know what their culture is like. I think it starts with understanding the culture of somebody else. But I do believe that our gospel, the gospel of Jesus Christ, the gospel that we see through the lens of the cross, through the Lutheran lens that Martin Luther and Philip Melanchthon have left for us, is a gospel for all people. And it's a gospel that we need to share with all people, and we haven't been very good at that. Part of theological education, part of the problem with theological education is that we exclude people because of the cost, and we exclude people because of the requirements to go and be part of the theological education process. We need to find leaders in Latino communities feel gifted and called by Jesus Christ to do the ministry of the gospel and to figure out ways to let those people run with ministry. We need to support them. It starts with stewardship on our end to find ways to support them so that they can go and they can actually proclaim the gospel in communities where that they can actually start congregations, they can start small groups, they can start different types of ways to be the voice of Jesus Christ in their communities. And I think we've started doing that, and it's been great to witness, and it's been great to learn, and there's a lot more work to do, and I'm excited to see how it plays out over the course of the next several decades.
I guess my first answer to the question about my vision is, it's not my vision. I, as a pastor, as a leader, is to support the vision of the people who call out, kind of like Paul's hearing the call from Macedonia. What is the call of the Latino, Hispanic folk? What is desired? Just like we have two different expressions of Africans meeting in the Dallas area, and they're totally different, the Latino congregations in our mission area are also different. And so I think it's important that whoever becomes the new bishop canvass those folks, canvass what is happening now, and find out what is the direction of the future. Because I don't think Jesus's horses are going to fit very well in Irma's Garland residence area. I mean, it might be all right, because I grew up in Garland too, but, huh? That'd be fine, okay. But as I said, I don't think it's a vision that has to come from the top. I think the vision has to come from the bottom, because all of us need to be committed to the mission of Christ. And how does that work best in the situation that we confront?
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to say that while I could learn Spanish, I don't know Spanish, and I could learn Spanish, I think that that still would not equip me to speak to a vision for Hispanic Latino leadership, that it needs to come from people who are authentically Hispanic and Latino. I would not promote myself as an expert upon that culture, and I recognize there are very significant cultural differences. So I would look to our Spanish language leaders already to begin to see how we can grow and expand their ministries. What I think is we have tremendous potential. We just need to continue very quickly, maybe, to raise up leaders who can step into those circumstances. I think we have some key models of some very great, powerful success stories. When I look at First Sagrada, which in Garland, which was First Lutheran and became then First Sagrada Familia in Garland, as that community came together, I think that's a powerful success story of an Anglo congregation recognizing as they were declining that was a wonderful space to raise up a Hispanic Latino ministry. And then I look to the creativity of starting a ministry in Alvarado that came together with people doing Bible study and riding horses and enjoying those activities together, and the development of that ministry. And I look at a blended ministry at Walnut Hill in Dallas and think about how, again, two very different congregations worship authentically, each in their own language, and yet work together as a community to proclaim the gospel in their context. I think we have tremendous potential not only within the Metroplex, but in our surrounding communities, rural and south-north panhandle. We just need those leaders. And so I would want to support and affirm raising up more leaders from our communities. Thank you.
I have a friend who often says, when it comes to ministry, it's all about the relationship we have with God and the relationship we have with each other. As we talk about a vision for Hispanic-Latino relationship, ministry, I have to be honest and say, I have not been fully connected into that ministry. I have friendships, I have connections. Oh, look at Julio, Jesus, Irma, Violeta. We have friendships, we have relationships. I believe a vision comes out of developing those relationships. And I think we take those relationships and we work together to create, and I think you guys have kind of articulated that same thought, of building a vision together. And I think that's the future for us. I think we've got an opportunity because we have a growing Latino Hispanic community around us, and we have a lot of churches that are also in communities that could be reaching out. What you're doing at Advent, I think, is tremendous. I think there's just all kinds of examples of reaching out in those communities. So what we do is we get together, we continue to work, we celebrate what's going well, we look at what's not happening well, and we say, now what do we need to do to make it better? And together we make that decision. So it is, although, about working together, proclaiming the gospel, making it known in every community. And it always begins with relationship, a healthy, healthy relationship. Thank you.
A vision for Latino ministry. It's been about a little over 2 years in the making in Waco. Waco Conference actually sat and talked for years about we need a Latino congregation in the Waco area. We talked. And about 2 years ago, Pastor Jesus and I sat down and we started talking and decided maybe it's time that the Latino congregation or mission start somewhere in Waco. Went to my church council and they're going, let's go. They were biting at the bits. And it's been about 2 years that this has been happening, and because of little obstacles here and there, it hadn't happened, which has been rather interesting listening to my church council, because every month we meet and go, so where's the Latino ministry now? How's it progressing? When is it going to start? When are we going to do? Yeah, and it's really very exciting because they're on board. We work with Alvarado San Gabriel. Pastor Jesus and I work together on this to develop this ministry. So is there a vision? Yes, in Waco there's a vision. We are going to have an ELCA Latino congregation in Waco. It's going to happen. For the synod or the mission area, again, I think that vision has to be there. It is relationship. It's training those leaders so that we can then develop those congregations. Pastor Jesus and I have some differing opinions on that. His comment, we're going to blend them together. And he went, no. There will be two congregations in the same building. Well, can we come and worship with the Latino congregations? And he said, well, we'll see. To which I explained to him, Our Lady Guadalupe, I will be there, period. I'll sit in the back of the church or whatever, but that's one of my favorite festivals to be at. So it's coming. It's going to happen.
Well, it's essential that we build upon the strength that we already have in our Latino conference. It's essential that we build upon the strength of the leaders that we have and to listen very carefully and to take seriously the input from the Latino conference and how we do and how we hold accountable one another. We are dealing with a situation right now at San Miguel and Santa Maria where we did not listen very well, and I would pledge to listen and then also to staff accordingly. We need staff that has not only we need language fluency, but also cultural fluency. And there's two things going on there. There's language fluency, but there's also cultural fluency. The fastest growing group in my Sunday school right now are children who are of multi-ethnic backgrounds. And through cultural fluency, I went to the LSPS Hispanic Intensive. Through cultural fluency, through working with Jesus, we've been able to do things with them. We've had a quinceañera. The people from San Gabriel have been kind enough to come up and do a posada one evening so that some of our children who are growing up in a largely Anglo congregation are getting that experience that is there. And I think we're going to see more and more of that as the communities blend. But the number one thing is we need to listen to our leaders and then provide opportunities. We just talked about leadership formation. Provide opportunities to develop leaders, to mentor them, to hold them accountable, and to help them develop, to clearly articulate what it means to be a Lutheran, so that they can understand that we have a gospel, we have a community. We can often sound very much like the tradition maybe they came from, but we are who we are. And we need leaders to articulate that gospel of grace, and then we need to find those leaders and listen to the Latino leaders and help us to grow. We have amazing opportunities here, friends, and we need to capitalize on those opportunities. Thank you.
When I introduced myself, I talked a little bit about my experience this past week at our clergy gathering and how we brought people together around the table. I want to tell you a little bit more about how our Latino pastors in Longview ended up at that table. For several years, and this clergy group's been going on now for 4 or 5 years, for several years it was African American and it was Caucasian. And we looked around our community and we said we've got a number of congregations that worship in Spanish and are serving a Latino population, but none of the pastors are here with us. And if we're about unity and if we're about building relationships together in Christ, why are they not here? The reason is we didn't have a relationship with them. And so we worked really hard over the last couple of years of building relationships with these Latino pastors, going to their congregations, going to the events that happen. And guess what? They showed up. And so I think that for me, as a white male, the most important thing that I can do as a pastor or as a bishop is to be engaged in relationships with people who are Latino and listen to what they have to say. And I don't mean just hear, I mean actually listen and respond. Because I think that's sometimes what happens. For the history of the ELCA, we've been talking about having multicultural ministry. And we set numbers out there. You know, we're going to be 10% this and 20, whatever it is. Have we reached those numbers? The answer is no. It doesn't matter if we're talking about Hispanics and Latinos or if we're talking about African Americans or Asians or whatever the group is, right? The truth is we haven't reached those numbers because we haven't listened and we haven't responded to what it is that we've been hearing. And so I think it's important for us as NTNL to come together in our unity in Christ, but to listen to one another and to respond to what it is that we're hearing being said. Thanks.
Yeah, it takes a lot of openness and openness on all sides, and openness that we haven't always been very good at showing in the ELCA or really in our country. And so I'm going to echo what everybody else has said about listening and being in relationship, because that's so important, because it is in those relationships and in those conversations, by the way, the conversations that go both ways, not just one way. It is in those relationships that we learn to love one another, which, by the way, is what we're commanded to do by Jesus. So we build these relationships, and then we realize that it's not my vision, as somebody else said. It's not my vision. It's not the other person's vision either. It's the work of the Holy Spirit among us. And what is the Holy Spirit doing to stir up her people? What is the Holy Spirit saying to people in the Hispanic and Latino communities, as well as all the other communities? You know, we have an incredibly diverse mission area, incredibly diverse. So the Spirit is moving. Are we listening? Are we paying attention to the ways in which the Spirit is trying to lead us? And I think sometimes we've done really well with that, and I think other times we need to listen more closely to the Spirit. And then we need to ask, how can we be open to the work of the Spirit? What is the Spirit up to? I've been listening to Mark and Eddie talk about what the Spirit is doing in Arlington at Advent. And the Spirit is working, and they are trying to be faithful as they listen to that. Because the love of God is the love of God is the love of God. It's the love of God for you and the love of God for me, the love of God for everyone. And all we need to do is just be faithful in proclaiming that love, whatever language we may speak.
So the vision that we at Advent have been living into started with Bible study, prayer, conversation, and then agreeing on some objectives or some ministry goals that we had no anticipation that it would lead us towards where we are now, and that was 7 years ago. What that vision began to look like was living and loving like Jesus, where we would expand our missional outreach. What that meant was, let's use our buildings differently, let's try to know who's in the community differently, and we tried to think about ways that we had been, by the Holy Spirit, given some vision to be a part of God's community where we were planted, where we were placed to be God's kingdom. So as we listen to God's Spirit, thank you, Kathy, for that. Pastor Kathy, yes. as we listened, and we became more and more aware as we had a little trunk or treat event that grew and kept growing and growing, and we had an Easter egg hunt that started small and kept growing and growing, and we all of a sudden started paying attention, who is our community and who's showing up at these events. It wasn't just for the people here, but it was for, we recognized our community was predominantly Latino within a 5-mile radius of our congregation, that being more than 38%. So we became aware visually, then we started looking at some of our demographics. And I think as we looked at our demographics, God was opening our eyes. It wasn't our vision or my vision, and not even the congregation's vision, but it was God's vision. And so as we began, we started saying, how do we do this? And 5 years later, we've called a mission developer to work in a parallel ministry. So the vision I have for this is, for the Hispanic Latino ministry or any other cultured ministry, is to listen to God's vision and prepare your hearts, prepare our hearts with God's commission to go baptize and preach and teach. Thanks be to God.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, thank you, all of you, for your faithful answers and for your time spent preparing for those questions. There were far more questions than they were asked just now, so thank you all for that. Again, we'll have a 10-minute break. Thank you, Pastor Janice, for being a faithful timekeeper, and all of you for being faithful to Janice. So this is all working out just great. We had 10 minutes, refreshments and coffee down this hallway, and then restrooms again down the other hallway. See you back at 2:35.
Pastor Jackie Linden Shade from Preston Meadow in Plano. Assuming that you do not become the bishop-elect, what one essential thing does our new bishop need to understand and embrace?
Oh, thank you so much. All right, let's start in the middle. Paul, would you like to begin? And we'll go that way and then around.
Oh, okay. Go that way. That's a tough one. I think personally that the bishop-elect needs to begin seeing the mission area as family, that we're all in this together and we need each other desperately. We need to share the mission that's going on in each congregation and share that with other congregations so we can celebrate that together. Where is the Spirit at work in TNL, and how is the Spirit progressing and sharing the good news of Jesus Christ? Every congregation has a story to tell. What's your story? And I would like to see the new bishop take that and run with that through the office and share that so we can all celebrate together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jackie, I didn't hear what you said about what is the, could you repeat the question just so I'm clear?
Okay.
Please don't count me on my timer yet, okay?
Sorry, I put it away.
Yeah, the one word I just couldn't hear, so.
Assuming that you do not become the bishop-elect, what one essential thing does our new bishop need to understand and embrace?
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right, so I think, just one thing though, right? You can't do two. Okay. So one thing that the bishop needs to understand and embrace is that we are, give me just a second here. Okay. So I believe we have got to move from talking into action. And I think we've spent a lot of time talking about things for a lot of years, and I think it's time to move forward in new directions. And I think the bishop needs to take this talk and move it forward, knowing that we are all together working as one. So we've got to take the talk and move it into action. I think that's it.
So questions on the microphone. One is welcome, or you have the number of people?
I would hope that whoever is elected as bishop would continue to keep us focused on being outwardly focused for missional leadership. Looking at our previous conversation, it's very clear that as a church it is no longer build it and they will come, but that we need to be actively engaged in witnessing our faith in our communities. So I would hope we could help each congregation either celebrate their vitality in missional outreach or help them to achieve that vitality so that they do share the good news. It is a message our world desperately needs to hear.
I guess the one thing is that the bishop is the pastor of the Northern Texas, Northern Louisiana mission area, and therefore needs to know their parish. And that means travel, that means getting to know people, that means listening to people, and that means, like any good pastor in a first call, share your own gifts. So that person, whoever that is elected bishop, share the gifts that God has given that person, and listen for the gifts that are in the congregation, which is, in this case, the Northern Texas, Northern Louisiana mission area.
I think the pastors of this area, mission area, need to be supported by the bishop and the bishop's office. They need to be encouraged. They need to be given the tools that they need to thrive in a changing culture. I've said this before at other places, and I apologize to you guys. This is now probably the 5th time you've heard this. But ABC News says that 80% or more of Americans claim to be Christians, while Huffington Post says 14% of Americans go to church on Sunday. That means there's about 2 out of 3 Americans, 2 out of 3 people who live in this country claim to be Christians but don't go to church. That's a great opportunity for us to figure out what obstacles has the church put in their way that has caused them to stay away from church. And we need to figure out why people who claim to be Christians aren't going to church. And we need to figure out how we can reach out to them, how we can break down barriers that has kept them away from church for years. I had a guy who showed up in my church, hasn't been to church in 27 years since his father's funeral. What is it that's kept him away? What is it that we can deconstruct and reconstruct so that church becomes a place where he feels welcome, where he feels at home, where he feels like he's living in the kingdom of God? And so outreach, I think, is really important. And number 2 is hospitality. I think people are going to start coming to Lutheran churches because people of my generation are sick and tired of easy answers to difficult questions, and they're going to look at Lutherans and say, that's the theology that I like. I'm going to go and visit, but I don't think a lot of our congregations are ready for visitors. I don't think we're ready to be hospitable to visitors so that they'll come back. And hospitality is something we really need to get better at. And I know there's a theology of hospitality, which is great, but we need to learn from the world leaders in hospitality like Disney how we can do hospitality better.
Assuming I am not elected bishop, I think my sense of call has been for many years to support the work of the wider church and somehow be involved with that in great ways. Assuming I'm not elected bishop, I will offer my support, encouragement, prayers, any ways to grow with and continue to be committed to the mission and the vision that emerges with the bishop's leadership.
I think that one essential thing for the new bishop to understand and embrace is that good and faithful ministry can and does happen in many different places and in many different forms. I think it's essential for all of us to realize that not all ministry looks the same, walks the same, talks the same. Ministry is contextual, and I hope that our new bishop understands that and embraces it. Thank you for both of those verbs, Jackie. Because I need the support of my new bishop in my little church in Grand Prairie, just like Nick does in South Lake and all the rest of them in their various contexts. We all need the love and the support and the prayers of our bishops for wherever it is that we are serving God in the most faithful way that we know how.
At the risk of sounding like a broken record, I think the essential thing that our new bishop can offer to us as leaders and as congregations is relationship or presence. Because it seems to me that sometimes in the midst of administration and in the midst of conflict and in the midst of everything that ends up on the bishop's calendar, that person can easily get isolated down the hall in the office down here. And so I think it's really important to establish, maintain, and support the relationships that are between pastors, are between congregations, and perhaps most importantly, I think, is the relationship between the bishop and congregations. Because a lot of people feel like the bishop doesn't show up at their congregation unless the bishop is there when? Sunday morning, right? The bishop might show up for a council meeting on a Tuesday night or a Thursday night or whenever your church council meets, but that's 7, 10, 12, 15, however many people are on your church council. And the rest of the people, the other 100 that come to worship, will say, we haven't seen the bishop in 3 years. You know, bishop was there last week at the council meeting, right? So the point is, how do we make sure that we maintain the relationships with the congregations through those who are leading the congregation? I think that's an essential gift and an essential part of being called to be bishop of NTNL.
I would hope that the bishop would embrace a spirit of abundance. And what I mean by that is encouraging, empowering, really cajoling if need be, local communities to look at themselves and see what is it do we have. Not worried about what we don't have. What is it that we have? How can we, whether we are a large congregation, whether we are a small congregation, whether we are an ethnic-specific ministry, how can we be abundant? And in so doing, that abundance leads to multiplication. A great example of this right now happening amongst us is the Umoja Church. That's a community that has a spirit of abundance. They say, let's go. Let's multiply. Let's move. Let's plant a site outside of Dallas. Let's go to Houston, to Fort Worth, to Austin. And I would hope that the bishop would encourage that and really encourage us to see what we have. And ultimately, what we have is the most amazing gift of all, which is God's Holy Spirit working amongst us. And so a spirit of abundance that would lead local congregations to see who they can be, how they can be multiplying ministries within their communities. I really pray we will have that kind of leadership.
Thank you. All right, yes. Come forward, please. Please identify yourself. Nope. This one is.
Pastor Julio Cruz, Emmanuel Lutheran Church. This one works. Emmanuel Lutheran Church. So we've been talking about Hispanic ministries, Latino ministries, and it almost sounds like, you know, a prize to go and grab, get these people in here. You know, we live in this time that shrinking churches, that more churches fighting for a smaller number of people that are willing or wanting to attend church, and Hispanic seems to be like the golden prize. While we play the number game, our ministries, be that they're Hispanics or Africans or whatever it may be, are not gonna be authentic. How do we develop an authentic Lutheran theology that doesn't only go to fill our church, but to serve authentically these communities? And let me just add this very quickly. What happened at Santa Maria and San Miguel, in my humble opinion, without being critical of anyone, but in my humble opinion, is because of that. Because we got lured into that number game. We have the biggest Hispanic church in the USA, in the Lutheran Church. And we even brought Bishop Hansen to speak there and be the voice of the church, talking about Hispanic ministries against a background that was not authentic, not Lutheran. It was just something else.
Okay, wait.
So again, the quick question is, how do we develop a Hispanic authentic theology that can serve our Hispanics and Latinos?
Very good, thanks. I'll give you just a minute to think about that. Minute's over. Okay, Jane, would you like to begin?
Sure. I'm going to use an example, actually, in my response, Pastor Julio. And it's an example of a young man that we're working with. He's not ordained. He's not even in candidacy yet at this point, but he's someone who has connected within the inner city Dallas community. He is working with a specific target population, and that is homeless, Black, LGBT youth who have shared with their families their sexual identity and as a result lost their homes. And I see him working in a very powerful way and very authentic way as he is partnering in some of our different contexts. He's partnered with Emmanuel, but he's also connected with Mount Olive because that is one of our Black congregations, and they're looking to find ways in which they can develop housing. And so when I speak about us being missional, I am not looking for just butts in a pew, frankly. We have a good news, a message of God's grace to share and healing, because I think we are sent to bless and heal a broken world. And I see the work that that young man is doing in the community as very much a way, and I think that's a distinctly Lutheran expression and theological perspective, in that he is extending God's grace to some of those who are perhaps the least despised, most marginalized within their contexts. So I see that as very authentically Lutheran, him living out grace in that way.
Thank you for the question, Julio. I think that basically, like any congregation, we have to make sure that we are being loyal to our tradition and loyal to the folks who have supported the congregations throughout this time. In this case, I believe that more contact with other Latino leaders would hope to keep any kind of aberration from occurring. On the other hand, there are people who take advantage of the church. And there may always be people that take advantage of the church. And so we have to be sensitive to what are our goals, to be faithful to God and not to the numbers, not to the money, and try not to get distracted from the mission.
I come from the business world, and numbers are important to me because they've been important to me my whole life. I think it's important that we take a look at the church where it is, where it's going, and talk about changing it so that we can change the story as to the future. That being said, we need to remain consistent with our theological understanding of who God is and what it means to be Lutheran. And when we start to, I think a lot of it goes into candidacy. Whenever we are raising up a leader, whoever it may be, if it's somebody coming from a different faith tradition or somebody coming up from within, that we need to make sure that any red flag that comes up is talked about thoroughly prior to ordaining or giving somebody the responsibility of being a called pastor in the Lutheran Church. I do think, though, that there's a great opportunity within the Latino community, within the Anglo community, right here in this area. I mean, Faith Flower Mound is doing great ministry, but there is no congregations along the I-35 corridor from Fort Worth up to Denton, and they are building nonstop. If you drive that way home, you're going to run into 1 million cars because of the racetrack. And you're going to see all the houses that are being built. We need to put authentic worshiping communities there, too. We need to figure out where people are moving to, and we need to plant congregations there. But authentic is important, and I think as Lutherans, it's easy to be authentic because our theology is one where we don't have to lie to people. We don't have to twist the gospel to make them feel like this is a place where they can feel at home, because everybody can feel at home with Lutheran theology. I mean, if you can't figure out, I don't understand how people can look at Lutheran theology and think, well, that doesn't work for me. Anyway, sorry. Thank you for the question.
We are saved by grace through faith, not by our works, but who God is and who God makes us to be. In our authentic self of being claimed by God in baptism, freed for the sake of the world to go and share God's love. It doesn't matter what the race is, it's how God meets that community and how God meets us and how our journeys come together and how we begin. For me, in our Latino ministry, it has been about understanding more of the Catholic and the Pentecostal background of our Hispanic and Latino neighbors, and realizing, well, that what they believe isn't so bad, but we believe something unique, and we are distinctively Lutheran in that, but we don't just say you're wrong and be authentic that way, which that has been the case in many times in many places. We perceive what someone else believes as wrong. If we start on the place of God's love through Jesus Christ, that we're gathered together by God's Spirit, Then we find something in common and we begin to explore together what it means to be the community that God's called us to be in this place and in this time. What I've observed Pastor Eddie, our mission developer in our congregation, doing, we make a lot of part of it is we make a lot of assumptions that all Latino people are the same. They're all Mexicans, right? They're not, and when we make that assumption, we offend, greatly offend. What Pastor Eddie has done, every time we've gathered together with new people coming to our community, he goes, "Where are you from? Tell me your background." He understands where they are and who they are, and then everybody in the room shares that, and then we share together. Well, what does it mean? What is being Lutheran a little different from how you've understood being Christian or being of the faith before?
I am privileged to serve in what is now the Eastern Mission Conference, which Vicki is our dean, and we have journeyed with Pastor Gus from Santa Maria de Guadalupe in Irving, now Santa Maria in Exile in Irving. And so my first question is, and I don't know the answer, Julio, my first question is, I do wonder if there's not a need for us to publicly grieve together some of what's happened across our mission area in some of the Hispanic and Latino congregations in the past year. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe I'm the only one who is moved to tears over that, but I don't think that I'm the only one. I think that caused a tremendous amount of pain for a lot of us across our conference, certainly, and I'm sure across Eric's as well. So that's my first question, is there a need for healing? My second question then, or my second thought is that we need to, as others have said, raise up leaders within the Hispanic and Latina communities so that they can become authentically Lutheran, whatever that looks like, whatever that means, and then provide faithful Lutheran leadership within those communities. As we already have many examples of those that are already doing that, we can point to leaders within the NTNL who are already wonderful, faithful, loving, authentic, very authentic Lutheran pastors and leaders in our congregations, and draw upon their wisdom and see what they think. I think that's the best way forward that I can see. And the new bishop then supports, loves, prays, etc., with those leaders and raises them up as he or she sees them.
What is an authentic Lutheran? Right. I think for me, some of the Lutheran, what we call dialectics, the both ands of Lutheranism, I think that kind of comes into authenticity. And the one that I want to highlight in this particular case, I think, is law and gospel. In other words, are we as leaders willing to be vulnerable and willing to say, I'm a sinner who's in need of God's grace, or I messed up in this area and I need to hear this good news and this gospel that comes to us. And I think that starts with the leader. It starts with the pastor, with the synodically authorized worship leader, whoever's leading a congregation. Is the pastor, is the leader willing to say, I don't know if I understand this right? Are they willing to be vulnerable with the congregation or be vulnerable with their bishop? And is the bishop ready to respond, to say, oh, do you need some help in this area? Do you need to be supported in this area? Do you need some further education in what it means to be authentically Lutheran? And I think that will allow us to move forward and to create congregations and sustain congregations that are authentically Lutheran and that continue to share the message of Jesus Christ out of that context.
So in full disclosure, I like numbers too. After college, I spent 2 years crunching numbers on the 20th floor of a building in Boston in the municipal bond market. And I like numbers, and I look at numbers every single week. I look at the numbers. They matter to me because they're people. I was coaching a first call candidate recently, and he said to me, how much do I measure? What do I measure? How much do I look at the numbers? And I said, I said, here's the thing, you need to know the numbers, you don't worship the numbers. And that's the danger that we fall into. We begin to worship those numbers and we don't measure other things. We have to do both. When we can, both and. We like that as Lutherans, both and. We can grow our congregations and care about individual relationships. We can grow our congregations and care about being authentic. We can grow our congregations and be about being for justice and peace and racial reconciliation. But we have to listen, and we have to be authentic, and we have to have that cultural fluency that I talked about before. We need to understand. We have great resources for that. We have our Latino conference. We also have LSPS down in Austin. And if you are an Anglo person and you haven't taken their Hispanic ministry intensive, if it sounds like an advertisement, it probably is. Because it's going to help you grow in understanding. Because there are people, they're not out to go and grab. And I hear that, man, and I think you're right on. We're not about going out and grabbing people any more than we want to go out and grab people in the western suburbs of Fort Worth. Although, well, I don't think we need more churches necessarily in the Metroplex. I think we need more Lutheran churches. Churches that preach the gospel of grace, that say to a woman in our school downstairs, well, your church won't remarry you because they have rules that say no, but you know what, the pastor upstairs, he'll do that wedding for you, and because he's got a friend, we can do it in Espanol. We can do it in the language of your faith, of your heart language. So I think we need to be culturally fluent, we need to staff for that, we need to hold that up, but we can grow and we can do this without giving up our authenticity.
Eric, I'm glad you like numbers. As a former bookkeeper accountant, I can't stand them. Lose them fast. We already have the tools we need. We have the scriptures. We have the theology of the Lutheran Church. We need to stay rooted and anchored in those, becoming more and more knowledgeable of what those things say and how the Spirit works through them so that we can reach out. Unfortunately, I see the church becoming involved in survivalism. How many butts are in the pew, and if it's not increasing, we're not like First Baptist down the street. Well, guess what? We're not like First Baptist down the street. We got something much better to offer, and whether that's large or small, we still have a gospel to proclaim and a mission to do. And I think that's where we lose it, is because we're so concerned how many people are on the membership roll, how much money is coming in, and yeah, we can grow past that. We can let that go and say it's about ministry. It's about mission. And we train our leaders, we train our laity to do that ministry. And whether you have 20 people in the pew or 5,000 in the pew, it's about Christ and what God calls us to do.
I thought it would be easier going last, but my goodness, you hear all these thoughts, and there's so many good thoughts. So, Julio, I want to get back to your question a little bit in terms of what do we do? How do we become authentically Lutheran? And I think the one thing we can do to be authentic in our Lutheranism is be willing to risk for the sake of the gospel, okay? And I think one of the ways we do that to work with each other is through the relationships we share. Like I said, I think it is all about the relationships. And so in those relationships, we become supportive of one another to encourage people to reach out in new and different ways. Also, when things seem to be a bit askew, we hold one another accountable. We start asking questions of one another, not in a judgmental sort of way, but in a relational kind of way, so that we can be true to the gospel that calls us. So I think we work together. But ultimately, and this may be painful to hear, I don't know that we can ever avoid mistakes like happened again. I think we have to be willing to risk and understand that sometimes mistakes will occur. We learn from them, we move forward. And I think if we stay tighter in relationship with one another, if we support one another, and if we encourage ourselves to go forward, I think we can do it together authentically and have an impact in the world. And one last thing before I'm out of time, the numbers thing I think is really important. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is we got to flip the metric. We've got to quit measuring what's coming in and start measuring what's going out. How are we touching other people? How are we serving other people? And start measuring that. And again, hold one another accountable. Because I think that's how we take the talk that we're talking and move it into action and impact lives. But I think the key is doing it together in relationship.
Thank you. All right. You look no worse for the wear at this point. That's good. We have a question from the internet. This comes from Catherine Teachin. She's from Messiah Lutheran Church in Weatherford, Texas. I'm sorry? Yeah. Whatever. All right. Her question is very simple. 2 words. Define integrity. Do, 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 do. All right, Jeff, start with you, and we'll go this way this time.
Willing to do what you say and let it show in your life.
All right.
Any Star Trek fans in the house? Star Trek Next Generation. Okay. All right, so when the hull is breached, it's a matter of integrity, right? So to me, if something has integrity, Jesus is trying to translate Star Trek The Next Generation. It's a spaceship. Okay, or a boat. A boat sailing in the water, if it doesn't have integrity, it sinks, correct? So integrity means wholeness. It means everything is as it should be, and therefore it can keep moving forward.
It seems like for me, integrity becomes something around honesty, and honesty requires listening and to the heart of another, and following through with what I say I'm going to do, or with holding accountable someone who is said they're going to do something, standing with them, walking with someone. There's a sense of integrity that Kathy says that I'm mindful of as I chaired this ministry to build this facility when we had the structural engineers coming in and thinking about the integrity. Will that wall hold that moving wall? We consider a bunch of different angles of what that meant for the integrity of not only a facility, but we work together. As I think there's a piece of integrity that means we work together.
Good.
A few years ago, Ruben Duran, who works for the Churchwide, asked me to speak at a mission developer conference and to present on what I'm doing that's working, basically. I think the name of the thing was Maintaining and Developing a Missional Attitude. And one of the things that I talked about in that was pastoral integrity. If you are going to ask your people to invite others to church, you had better be inviting others to church. Every time somebody comes to church on Sunday morning and the greeters say, "Oh, hi, are you new? Have we ever?" I said, "No, this is my first time here. The pastor invited me." Integrity. If you're going to stand up and ask for your members of your congregation to give 10% to as offering, you better be giving 10%. If you're, as a bishop, going to stand up and ask congregations to up their mission support to 10%, you better come from a congregation that has been giving 10%. Anything you ask somebody else to do, you better be willing to do. That goes all the way back to Jesus saying, "Pick up your cross and follow me." But guess what? I'm going to pick up mine too. Thank you.
In keeping with the question, say what you mean what you say, and live what you say and what you mean.
I was going to say, not just the talk you talk, but living the talk you talk through your daily walk. Being willing to be honest and to be vulnerable, to be able to acknowledge mistakes and that you have learning to do, being true to yourself and making sure others know that and living it out each day.
Wow, I can't think of any more cliched phrases to use anymore because I was going to be the one that Russell used. But I think I'm going to stick with that honesty idea because I really think it begins with honesty. And I want to say it starts with yourself. I think you have to be honest with yourself before you can be honest with other people, and then it goes both ways. And so, again, I don't think if you live that way, you have to recognize that you can't ask anybody to do something that you're not willing to do yourself. And you've got to be honest with who you are, and that is a sinner in need of Jesus' love and grace. And if you understand that, it becomes very easy to proclaim that to others and share the good news of the gospel. So that's integrity for me.
Well, I'll use the cliche. It's talking the talk and walking the walk. It's being honest with who you are, what you are, and then living that out in a very real way.
Thanks, Catherine. I get to go last on this one, right? Yeah, all those nice cliched phrases. Well, I'll add a couple to that. But I think it has to do with all of those things. Integrity, for me, comes first out of humility. And humility recognizes I'm going to screw up. I'm going to fail. I fail a lot, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to try again. And the integrity to say it's okay for that to happen. We are Lutherans, and I remember when Kendra and I were in seminary, and we would talk about this a lot. You know, Lutherans love that scene where Luther stands in front of Emperor Charles V, right, and he's up there. That's our moment. That's our big deal. Here I stand, I can do no other, so help me God. Here's the thing about integrity. You have to know what your here I stand moment is, because you don't get very many of them, right? What is your here I stand moment? And I think as Lutherans, that's something we can build on, along with what everybody else here said, probably.
Is that it? I didn't want to cut you off.
Oh, I'm your dean.
I know, right? I didn't want to cut you off too soon. Okay, question? See if it works. Identify yourself, please.
Austin Adams, Faith Flower Mound. This week, Bishop Knaus, in his last Lifeline, writes of some of the 24 constitutional duties of the bishop. It's a role of administrator, sometimes referee, teacher, counselor, but in my view, the most important is vision caster. Many of you have said generically we must have vision. I'm interested in more specifics. Express concisely the vision that you have developed in each of your current respective calls. How do you measure success in achieving this vision, and how successful by this standard have you been?
Okay, thank you.
You may want to give them more than 2 minutes.
No, they get 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Let them think about that just a moment. I would want to think about it just a moment. Okay, moment's up.
In our ministry, we discern communally through Bible study and prayer that our vision, that God is calling us to be people who live and love like Jesus. And we do that in 4 ways around missional outreach, nurturing our young people and our youth in ministry. We're going to build healthy relationships, and we're going to support each other in the ministry. Those are the 4 objective areas. Our council monthly measures what we do and asks each other those 4 questions. How are we doing against our mission? And so how are we succeeding? It's a learning curve to drive people or get people thinking about something bigger than just maintaining what's there. But so we've had to figure out in balance what's the maintenance roles of each group in the ministry of each church, as well as the missional outreach, or the aligning our ministry alongside of our vision that God has given us.
Concise 4 words. Where'd he go? Austin, where are you? Oh, you're over there. Sorry, hi. Love God, love neighbor. I mean, that's pretty simple, right? Jesus told us to love God and love neighbor. That's difficult to measure, and without going into some numbers games like what Julio talked about. But I've seen my congregation turn away from worrying so much about how we pay our bills and pay the pastor and all of that, to trying to be a positive neighbor in our community. And how do we love the people in our community? And that is like turning a steamship on a dime. It's very, very, very hard to do because it takes time. People's hearts have to change. But I know for me, one of the things that I look at is when they're the ones that are making suggestions of how we can take better care of our community, rather than the idea coming from me, they're the ones saying, well, how about we do this? How about we do that? And show the love of God to the people of Grand Prairie and the surrounding environments in these different ways. What do you think about that, Pastor? Rather than me saying, I think we should do this, they're saying it to me.
serve a congregation called First Lutheran Church of Longview, and our mission/vision statement is that we are formed and loved by Christ to live in relationship with God, one another, and our community. We have restructured our whole church council around that statement. So we have a council member who is relating to relationship with God stuff, and one that's relating to relationship with community stuff, and one that's relationship with one another kind of stuff. We've just started that this coming year. Have we measured our success yet? No. But we did just complete a Lenten series on a variety of things that we're doing as a congregation together. And the summary of that was we are really big in the community, and we're really big with one another. And so I think that's one of our ways of measuring success is in conversation with members of the congregation to say, what are you doing in your ministry? How are you living this out every day? What does it mean for you to be formed and loved by Christ when you live your relationship with God personally, or your relationship with one another in your family, or your relationship with the community around you? So those are the types of questions that we're asking, but we're just getting started in this right now. But I do want to say one thing else, and I'm going to do that by asking a question, because this is where your vision starts. How many of you brought a Bible today? If you have a Bible, raise it, put it up in the air. Or if you have a Bible app on your electronic devices. All right, and you actually use it or know how to use it. Okay. Now I don't want to. Oh man, she's giving me the yellow card already. But my point is, this is where vision starts, and y'all, this is a church meeting. Everybody ought to have their hand up with their Bible, right? Because if we're going to talk about vision for the church, where does our call come from? Our call comes from God, and how do we know God? It's through the Word of God, through the Scriptures. That's who we say we are as Lutherans. That's what we're called to be, and that's what our vision is about.
Moment there where I thought Jeff was channeling Joel Osteen. Hey, y'all ever see it? This is my Bible. I have what it says I have. I can, yeah, I am what it says I am. The authentically Lutheran Joel Osteen, Jeff Borgwood, ladies and gentlemen, he's here all night. Vision. Without a vision, the people perish. That's what Proverbs 29:18 tells us, right? And I like that scripture because I think it's right on. Trinity developed their vision statement before we showed up. Thank you, Alicia. We're grateful for that. Make Christ known, share God's love and grace. We say it every single day after the end of worship. Every single Sunday, every single worship, make Christ known, share God's love and grace. That's pretty vague. So we developed a 2017 vision because we're going to have our 75th anniversary in 2017. It's also this 500th anniversary of this little event in Wittenberg that people care about. And around that vision, we had four main things. And we have structured our life around those things. Our council reports, my report, relate to those things. We want to be culturally relevant. What does that mean? We are planted in the heart of the Fort Worth Cultural District. We want to connect to the cultural district. We want to connect to our community. How do we do that? Well, it happens in our building. It happens in what we have going on in our building. It happens in how we relate. We are the only church that's a member of the Cultural District Alliance, trying to connect with our community. I got to write it down real quick because, you know, my brain's a little addled. Church and school together in mission. We have a school. It's one of the most wonderful things we do, but they're not always been tied together in mission. We are working to have church and school together in mission. Staffing that works both ways. As lead pastor, I'm the head of staff for church and the school. We work together in mission. Multiplying everything, planting new ministries. Everything should be multiplying. It doesn't mean necessarily growing all sorts of great new ministries. It means multiply what you're doing. Invite someone new. Be a part of something new. And then disciples, not members. How do we serve in the community? How do we get out of the box, get into our buildings? That's our vision. That guides everything we do. That guides our budgeting process. That guides our reports process. It's work, but you can do it, and we've been able to do it.
First, your question was about vision in the mission area. I cannot do vision for the mission area. I think it's the whole mission area together, because otherwise it becomes my vision. And I live and die for it, and that's all there is. No one else has to support it. At St. Matthew, our vision is Christ's family in service. It's our vision. We are Christ's family because Christ has died for us, made us his own, given us life, and it dictates how we deal with one another, even in the midst of conflict, because families have conflict. So that's okay. It's not a bad thing. And we are about service. We're about mission. We're about reaching out into the community. And that has, you were asking the measurement. Personally, I think it's going tremendous that we're able to do mission. That just dictates what we do with the Latino ministry. This Saturday for Mosaic in Waco, we're building raised flower beds for them. Lutheran World Relief, we're constantly looking at how do we take the gospel and share it with people in need, or share it with people who have a desire to hear that gospel. So our vision is being a family, the family of Christ. Who are we? Rooted in that word, rooted at that cross. We are his family, and we have a mission.
The vision for Briarwood is a place where people experience God's love. That's been a vision statement for this ministry for a long time. And yet, at a certain point, when I was a parish pastor at Rejoice in Capel and at Faith in Flower Mound, we didn't feel very strongly connected to this ministry. And it seemed that while some people here experienced that, it wasn't the experience of everyone. So when I became executive director here, I became focused on making that a message that we shared with the world. And again, it's about the relationships and developing relationships with this wider church. And so how do we measure it? By seeing the involvement of others. Watching our summer staff. When I first came here, we had a summer staff of about, well, we had 16 or 18 hired, 5 left during staff training. We barely made it that summer. The next summer, after we changed things around here and started focusing on it, we had kids coming and wanting to be a part of it, and we grew the staff. And last summer, we had our largest summer staff ever with 30 young adults. We also have increased our volunteer involvement here. So how do I measure it? I see other people wanting to be a part of this ministry. What's really exciting, a number of people on the Briarwood board are sitting here around this table, and it excites me greatly because Briarwood is not just a ministry unto itself. Briarwood is our ministry together. And together, our mission is that people may experience God's love, and it takes us working together. So I measure it by people's involvement and the people we serve, and that's exactly what I mean. I think it's about not just talking about it, but it's about doing it and seeing results that are measurable. And I'm excited about what's happened here at Briarwood. We're sitting here in an example of what we can do better together through those relationships than we can apart. So we give thanks to God that we are growing this ministry through relationships, that all people may know God's love.
My context is a little bit different than the parish pastors who are up here, but our mission is, or our vision is, sowing and growing disciples of Jesus Christ as a mission area. And so a piece of that is my unique piece. When I took my call 7 years ago, the bishop said to me, one of the places where, at that point we were a synod, or the synod makes the most impact in a congregation's life is through call process. Let's be honest. Unless you're in some kind of emergency or you want to have a celebration, you really don't need our office. But call process is one of those moments where we have a chance to make a difference in the life of a congregation. And so I took his words to heart and have worked very hard to be faithful in my prayer life and listening to the Holy Spirit as I work with our congregations that are in transition, to walk with them so that we can have minimal anxiety and that they know that I am there as a support and a resource for them throughout the process of their interim, during the transition, and then in their next called pastor. For the last several years, we have had probably the lowest mobility vacancy rate, which means we've had the lowest percentage of congregations vacant in several years. We're at 9 or 10%, which is incredibly low. That says the Holy Spirit's done a pretty good job, and I guess I've been listening okay, because I think we're getting some excellent pastors, and they are serving their congregations well. A second piece of that is when I first started, we were experiencing some conflict in our congregations. So the bishop tasked me with finding a way to address that, rather than having to respond after the fact. What could we do? And a piece of that has been some ongoing education that we have provided so that congregational leaders could function in healthy ways and remain outwardly focused for mission.
I may go at this a little differently than you asked the question. When I was called to First United Lutheran Church in Dallas, Texas, it sounds like a very impressive call. It's a very small church, and it's very low attendance on a Sunday morning. It had its heyday from 1923 forward, and it's not in a spot that they believe they were growing. When I came, I was asked, would I stay the 5 years till the money runs out and they shut the doors? Well, I've been there 7 years. I don't take a lot of responsibility. I don't take all the responsibility for that. But what I saw myself there, coming there to do, and what I've done at Durant, what I've done at First in Waco, what I did in the 2 churches in Irving, is my call has been, in the last, as interim and as a pastor, to go in and help congregations heal from past experiences, to help them feel confident, to build relationships, to celebrate what they do accomplish that they may not even recognize is the mission of the church, and then to help them embrace that and then go forward so that they can build up their finances, build up their membership. And yes, we've averaged slight increases in membership, slight increases in average attendance. We've added a music program so that we're well known in the Southern Methodist University area for affirming future church musicians. The thing is, we have hurting people in our congregations. And I think that's a lot of times what the pastors deal with, even though they don't necessarily drag that out as one of their great successes. And I think it's what a bishop or an assistant to the bishop needs to do in our mission area right now.
I think a strong vision is important. A strong vision that can unite people, a common purpose. What I found, I'm going to start with conflict for a minute. As a district sales manager for Chrysler, I was the conflict resolver, if you will, between the corporation and the dealerships. And I found that in corporate America, it's a lot easier to resolve conflict than in the church. And I'm going to say that because in corporate America, there's a common purpose, making money, and everybody realizes that. The church is missing a common purpose. And I think a strong vision for the future is one that I talked about a few minutes ago, where 2 out of 3 people are Christians that don't go to church. And the text that I'm reading is 2 Corinthians verse 5, chapter 20. Therefore, we are Christ's ambassadors, as through God we make his appeal through, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. The New Living Translation says, come back to God. I think that is the vision for our future in the future, is to go out and to tell people to come back to God, no matter what you've done. Dan Lund, I sit on the board for the Church of the Damascus Road. Dan Lund is doing amazing ministry inside prisons, telling men to come back to God. It doesn't matter what you've done. That's what grace is. God forgives you what you've done. Just come back. How do we measure that? Abiding Grace brings in 40 to 50 new members every year. And I would say 20% of them, I will send a transfer request to the congregation that they list on their member form. And I'll get a call from a pastor and say, I've been here 15 years and I've never met that family. It's happening, and it can happen more often, and we can change people's lives by calling them back to God. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay. We're actually, it's 3:30. We actually have time for one more question. If anybody has yes, please come forward. Actually, let me come to you. This microphone's not working, so.
Okay, I'll do this one. Hi, I'm Ashley Bergeron, and full disclosure, I am a pastor's spouse. So we are at New Life in Christ, Duncanville, and I am 20-something, and most days I identify as a millennial. So my question for you, that I had to write down on my phone instead of on a piece of paper like I've seen a lot of people write, how do you envision helping congregations and their leaders to understand and welcome millennials, youth, and young adults?
Thank you. All right.
There you go.
And we'll go this way.
I've got some bad news for you. Every year, like I said, we have a summer staff of about 30 young people. They are alive with the gospel. They really do. They practice it. They share it. It's real for them. When they leave Briarwood, they tell me they can't find a church that speaks to them. That's the challenge. You're absolutely right. I think we have to rethink some of the ways we do church. And I think we have to look at new models for that. It may mean, and I do believe this because I understand folks really are fed with these traditional models. And so maybe those have to keep going and we have to keep nurturing them, but we have to get out of the box and start thinking about different styles of community, different styles of worship, and different ways to serve. I see my young people all the time get so frustrated, and frankly, what frustrates me the most is when they go to some of these non-denominational churches that are really Baptist, but they hide under that phrase non-denominational, and then they go there. And it's not that I'm against that. Good, I'm glad they're in a church. I'm glad those churches are serving. But we have so much to offer with our heritage of a focus on grace, and I don't want us to lose that to the next generation. So I believe we've got to rethink the way we do ministry, particularly with young folks. And perhaps what we have to do is recognize that there are different communities and different styles are needed. So there are the traditional styles that really feed people in very real ways. There are the Latino Hispanic communities that have their needs. There are the Umoja congregations that have their needs. There are these different communities that we need to be responsive to, and we need to recognize that the millennials have different needs as well and respond to them with new opportunities. Thanks.
Boss says go this way. I agree with you, Phil. We have to look at different ways of doing it. When I went to St. Matthew, we had a contemporary worship that was done for the youth and the millennials. Interestingly, none of them showed up, because it was not done for them, it was done for the baby boomers. And the baby boomers were running it. And I finally said enough is enough, because I asked the kids, I said, what would you like to see in that worship service? And their answer was songs we sing at camp. Great, let's do that. No, we're not going to do that. We want to do what's on the radio. And so, yeah, I think we have to look at a lot of variety and different ways of doing. I have, in St. Matthew, we have a large group of Baylor students who come who want traditional worship. They love traditional. They will go to to more contemporary styles that we use in a jazz service that we do. They like that, but they like the orderliness of good liturgics, and we try to teach that. So I think you have to sit down with the millennials, you have to sit down with the teens, and you have to ask them, what is it that you're looking for, and how can we supply that? Because we can't always do that. I had a young lady in my first congregation came in and said, you know, if you had a drum and a bass guitar and a keyboard up there, I'd come to church. And I just looked at her and I said, you know what? I would love to have that. I think it would be wonderful. However, your parents come here, what would they think? She said, oh, they'd die. I said, thank you. That's about 99% of this congregation. However, there's a church down the road that does that. I think you might want to check them out. She went and came back 3 months later and said, thank you. I'm being fed. Now, would I like for her to stay in my congregation? Yes, I think that would be great. However, that's where she got fed. We have to look at those variety, and then how can we have the ability to do that?
I haven't checked my Facebook feed since I got here. I know that's shocking to many of you, or Twitter even. But I'm sure on there's about 15 or 20 things telling me how to get millennials in my church, right? That's what we all do. It's an obsession. At Trinity, we are positioned in a demographic area where we do get 20s and 30-somethings joining because we're in the cultural district. Our average new member class consists of 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds and 50-year-olds and 60-year-olds. Why? Because they're not people with kids, and they're moving back into the city or they're starting their life in the city. And what have we done to attract them? Well, I can't say that I've done anything so spectacular except for welcome them, listen to them, take them seriously. We have events for them. We have what we call the Monday Fun Day crew that they lead. And that's the other thing. Invite them to lead. Listen to them. We talk a lot about young adults in the church. We talk a lot about having younger people in the church. And then we revert back to the same people in leadership. And I think that's a challenge that we have to take seriously. Are we listening to these people? Worship style, sure. You're not going to please anybody with your worship style, all right? You can do, if you're a big enough congregation to do 15 different styles, that's awesome. Good for you. And do it really well. We do traditional worship at Trinity. I think we do it pretty good. That's what I hear. Do what you do and do it well. But I would say the most important thing with children, young adults, all of those folks, the other thing, just real quick, is don't assume. Don't assume they're going to know the reference to Noah. Don't assume they're going to know the Bible stuff because their parents didn't bring them to church either. So you need to start with the basics. This is the Bible. It's got 66 books in it. And not in a condescending way, in a way that says, I'm interested in how you experience this. So listen, put them in leadership, and don't make a lot of assumptions.
I want to take a little bit bigger picture view, because like Eric said, there's a gazillion things that come across our desks or somehow find their way into pastors' hands about how you can attract and retain millennials and young adults and all the rest. I graduated high school in 1988, and incidentally, that's also the year the ELCA formed, right? And so there was this big push, right? We're going to have young adult ministry, and guess what? I was a young adult now, right? Because young adult ministry in those days went from age 18 to, anybody know? 24, right? Only recently, by the way, have I not been a young adult in the ELCA. I'm serious, because when I reached age 25, suddenly young adult ministry went from 18 to 30. When I reached 30, suddenly young adult ministry in the ELCA went from 18 to 35. And several years ago, I was sitting in a continuing ed conference, and this person was there talking, and I was probably about 38 at the time, and I leaned over to this guy that was next to me who was also 38, and I said, how much you want to bet that it's going to go to age 40? And I'm not kidding you, the next slide had young adult ministry from age 18 to 40. I haven't seen it go to 50 yet, so I think I'm out of the young adult range. But my point is, we need to repent. We need to repent in the ELCA because we have failed miserably our young adults. And that includes folks that are my age, right? Because all during that time, why did we keep moving that age up? Because the older folks, baby boomers, the next generation above baby boomers, didn't want to admit that their kids, my age, were adults. And so I think this is much bigger than a local congregation. This is a denominational issue that together we need to address, is what does it mean for us to be in young adult ministry for the sake of Jesus Christ?
So this is our sixth one of these, and I've gotten to know these potential nominees pretty well, and I already knew Phil well even before he was a potential nominee. And I have absolutely no doubt that if our future bishop is one of the 10 of us, right, 10 of us now, that the new bishop will be open to the idea that we have to do ministry in different ways in order to reach some of these groups that you mentioned, Ashley. I have no doubt about the bishop's willingness to be open, which means that y'all have to be open. It can't just be the one person. It can't just be the pastor of the church or the bishop of the synod. It has to be y'all sitting out there, and not just y'all, but the other y'alls that are out there that couldn't be here today for whatever reason, and the y'alls that are watching right now on the computer. It has to be all of us being willing to be open to the fact that maybe people don't worship the same way that we do, or with the same type of music, the same type of liturgy, etc. Different people have different needs, and that's okay. And we can remain faithful to the gospel of Jesus Christ. We can even remain faithful to a good Lutheran witness to the gospel of Jesus Christ in many different ways. And I know we've said that a lot today. I've said it a lot today, but that's how strongly I feel about it. It's going to take openness on our part, on all of our parts, to realizing that maybe the younger generations want something different than we do. And maybe, just maybe, when they have their phone out and they're doinking around on their phone, they're not doinking around. Maybe they're sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ with somebody on their phone. I did that one Easter. Holy cow. It was like, what? But you know what? I tell you what, people shared this picture that had the word hallelujah in it, and it was a beginning. It was something. We're going to have to get better at using social media to share the gospel, but we're going to have to get better at using social media as well to build and maintain relationships, because that's what those younger generations are also about.
Thanks for the question. These are a question that I've been asking and trying to repeat in our meetings at church and within different conversations. So I wrote down, okay, what are my mantras around this that I find myself repeating? And one is that we do things that make a difference. So often that we do things because for the sake of doing them, we keep doing them. Why? Because we've done them before. The things that make a difference for the people who are there, for the 20-somethings, the 30-somethings, the 40-somethings, the 50-somethings, what makes a difference? And don't assume. I think Eric's right on. Don't assume that we know what someone else needs. So do things that makes a difference. I think the millennial and young adult and young families that I've worked with have said, and many times, we want to respond to the needs of our community and the world in real ways without waiting for a committee to approve it. I think it's a now and an immediate response to the needs. Kathy mentioning the social networking. We've talked about that time and time in our congregation, how we need to be more accessible and create opportunities for the gospel to be more accessible and relationships more accessible through social media. I've observed too that maybe I'm not a millennial, but I find the space at Briarwood and for my own needs that I think was missing what I yearned for even during college, which was met from time to time, that there's a mystery about our faith that we tend to explain things to death. We need to create space to how to explore the holy and what that means as the holy engages and experiences us that doesn't have all the answers.
Well, I come at this differently because I'm a young adult. Every ministry I do is young adult ministry. I look at this, there's three main things I think that if I'm looking at people my age and younger in their 20s, and Abiding Grace has seen a lot of young families join, a lot of young single people join, because I think we do these three things well. First is with relationships. We build relationships, and relationships is so essential to ministry, and social media really helps us do relationships. It's easier to do relationships now than it has been. Your friends on Facebook, you start connecting people on Facebook. It's really easy to do that. And the second, I think, is a place where I think if there's anything somebody my age wants as far as religion goes, they want to go to a place where their ideas are welcomed, where they're not told that they're wrong. Well, no, that's wrong. You're wrong because you think X, Y, Z. I think it's important to be a congregation that welcomes all ideas and allows a space for people to wrestle with faith together. I may not agree with you, but I love you, and we're going to wrestle with this faith together because I just think people my age need a place to go where they can express their faith, express their doubts, express their thoughts in a safe place. And finally, I think hospitality. Hospitality is so important. We say all people are welcome, but what we really mean is you're welcome here if you think like us, if you do things the way we do things, and oh, by the way, don't sit in my chair. Right? We need true hospitality where all people are welcome, their ideas are welcome, their leadership gifts are welcome, and we're going to do whatever we can to make sure that you feel like this is your family, where you walk in, you feel at home. What can we do to make you feel that way? Is it a nursery? Is it a good parking spot? I mean, is it a sign so you know where to go to the bathrooms? It's as simple as that sometimes. Thank you.
I realized I was mostly thinking, what am I already doing? I think your question was, what can we do in the future? Is that correct? Yeah. And I'm going to have to base it on what we were already doing. And some of it you already heard. One is when people that are younger have a passion about something, you go with it, you support it. So we started a clothing ministry twice a year. People come and exchange clothes. There's no money transactions, it's just a gift. And that came from a young person. And they just asked for a space, and we said, okay, let's go with it. I think the Lutheran Church also has a long history of beautiful music, and those people that like classic music, we affirm that. So we have these music scholars from SMU that come, and they like that we are a place, the Lutheran Church, First United anyway, where we use classic music, and we have a wonderful organ. However, we also have a group that has guitars, and we let them go. No drums yet, but guitars. So it's whichever one. I mean, I think we have to affirm the gifts that are there. And we even had a Men Who Love Spaghetti group start, where the younger guys could meet with older guys and talk about how do you move up in the business world, how do you, deal with your family relationships along with that. And it was a chance for them to kind of have an intergenerational experience from people who've kind of been through there before. I think the church needs to be open to what people are asking for and find a creative way to address it. And it's going to change depending on what the circumstances are, the context is. Openness is the key.
Ashley, thanks for that question. My daughter and her husband are actually kind of wrestling with the same issue. The church shall remain nameless, but they are struggling very hard to be engaged in a worship community, and as they walk through the door, have not really spoken with anyone. So I'm continuing to encourage them. I get what you're talking about. I think it begins with relationship. It begins recognizing that our young adults have something to offer us. This is yet again another culture, much like we would talk about any of our ethnic cultures. I'm not a young adult, although I think there might be hope for me as the age group keeps moving up. Maybe I'll be there again, but far be it for me to be an expert on what young adults would value and find helpful to be involved as members of the congregation. But it begins with that relationship and that conversation together, exploring the possibilities and honoring the wisdom that they bring to the conversation, and lifting them up and blessing and encouraging them in areas that they are passionate, encouraging them to be owners of ministries and leaders of ministries, and valuing the voice that they have. I think they have a great deal to offer to us. And so it doesn't matter so much what the worship is like, because I know that those who are young adults worship in a variety of ways and value those because they're ways that are meaningful for them. I think the opportunity arises for us to listen and learn from them.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, thank you all so much for being here and allowing yourselves to be vulnerable in this time and space in our church's history. And we really appreciate, all of us really appreciate you. Let us give them a big hand. Yeah. And it is really a big deal that most of you have done all of these, haven't you? How many of these have you had? 4? 6. Yeah, 6. Wow, getting around. Okay, good. Well, thank you so much for your commitment to the church. And thank you all for being here today. I'd also like to thank Pastor Janice for keeping our time, Pastor Jesus for being our translator, and let us rise and join in the Lord's Prayer in the language of your choice. Let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Let us go in peace and serve the Lord.